days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and crouched just outside my bathroom window waiting to join the conversation, it's my co-host, Matt Mountain Lion Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Smash sound effect. It's me. I'm here.
How many years have we been doing these? And they're not getting better. The intros are getting worse. Like, you could track the downfall of our intros.
I think it's sporadic. It's like you keep, like, if every fifth one is okay, then it's like, well, maybe this time it'll be good, and then you come back and you check.
We're really just rolling the dice each time because we spend a lot of time prepping for the show. The introduction is not one of the things that I spend a lot of time prepping for. The introduction is, I'll save this till 5 minutes before the show starts. And I'll just whatever pops into my head. And so every once in a while you get a good one, but
and I don't even read it before you say it to me. So that's always
the most fun part.
I'm reacting off the cuff. So if it's not funny, it's usually my fault.
No, I'm not going to say that.
Well, yeah.
Anyway, this week, our 11-part coverage of Stephen King's Desperation continues as we cover chapters 1 through 3 of part 3. The Kali and Trajan Survival Society gets comfy in the American West movie theater as we learn a little bit more about old Tom Billingsley and, most importantly, about Audrey Weiler and the China Pit. Just when things seem to be going okay for our characters, a mountain lion takes out the veterinarian, but not before he can reveal some very important information. Audrey Weiler seems to be a lot taller than she used to be. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
I didn't notice that it was ironic and that the mountain lion took out the veterinarian until just now. So that's this is really fun. I mean, so it all becomes even more fun in retrospect after the final reveal of the final moment, when you're like, oh shit, and you think back over all of the moments that you kind of misunderstood and misinterpreted as just being various characters being horny, which wouldn't be all that unusual in a King novel. But so that element was fun. I also just enjoy the palaver sections just in general. Of any given King book, I'm going to be down for a good palaver. This is what that is, and I love it, and I love it here too. I think it's one of the places where the characters really get space to explore who they are and to draw more nuanced paintings of who these characters are by having them argue with each other. In this case, I think it's really cool because it actually sort of takes the form of this debate, actually, which is interesting.
I agree, except for our old friend Ralph Carver, who is still very there. He's in the room, technically.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't say nothing, but I agree that he continues to hang. But see, I think in this particular case, I didn't literally forget that he was there. It was more just like, oh, he's being quiet because his daughter has been killed and his wife has been taken away, and he's like more shell shocked than anyone else is, because I think Mary's lost her husband, but she's just tougher. David is just on a different wavelength than everybody else. Yeah. And then Johnny hasn't really lost anybody. Billingsley is kind of in a different. Anyway, I'm not gonna go through everybody. The point is, like, it's understandable that he's just kind of stumbling around, not reacting to things.
I do think Steve gets a little lost this week as well. Cynthia does for a long time until like the very end when the book shifts to her point of view again, and we kind of rediscover her. And of course, plot-wise, Steve gets to do important things, going after the mountain lion. But I think he does get a little lost. There was a moment where he said something in the conversation, and we'll get to it in the show, that I was like, oh, it's Steve saying this? I guess that feels like just because we were reading over our chapter and realized Steve hadn't said anything in a while. It doesn't feel particularly Steve to me, but we'll get there. I do think, we talked last week at the beginning of the show, and I was a little as close to negative as I'll possibly be in these introduction parts of the show, that I just wasn't enjoying the book as much as I wanted to. I will say I I really loved the hell out of these 3 chapters. I think the problems I have with the characters are still kind of there with some of them, but we're getting a lot of time spent with some of the characters that I really do like, and I think that all that stuff works really well. And the big Audrey reveal at the end of the chapter is just like one of my favorite things about this book. I think it works so well, and it's so fun, and I think it's gonna be really fun to talk about because yeah, I think the way King does set it up, but not at the same time, like it's there, but you will probably never notice it until after the fact is just fun.
Yeah, I agree. I think just on an overall note of what you were saying a second ago about the characters disappearing, I think it's just the problem is there's 7 characters, which is just a
Yeah,
really awkward number of characters to have in a big room having a conversation together.
sure.
I think there's a reason why King usually keeps the quartets at like 4 or less. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could probably level the same complaint in the stand when they're having the first meeting of the Boulder Free group, and it's like all of our characters have finally gathered together for the first time, and you do kind of lose them a little bit here
yeah,
and there. It is just very hard to keep that many characters all together and straight.
yeah,
And like there's just I feel like the book cares a lot about David. It cares a lot about Johnny. It cares a fair amount about Steve, a little bit about Mary. I just don't know if the book knows what to do with Ralph Carver yet. Maybe it will just rediscover it as the book goes on, but yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into it. Before we do that, we just wanted to give everyone a quick announcement. Next week is Christmas, and we are going to take off that week between Christmas and New Year's. I think Matt has some family in town. I'm going to be spending time with family as well. So we're just going to take that week off, and 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 we'll be back the first week in January to pick up where we left off there. So I hope everyone enjoys their holiday, and we're going to do the same.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, let's get into it, Matt. Let's talk about chapter 1 of part 3, The American West. This is we joked, we do this sometimes, Matt, where we like joked around last week about how clearly a metaphor, but then we didn't like say what it was a metaphor for, which I blame myself for. But I think this opening kind of cements this for us, right? I think the reading this week begins with our characters kind of marveling at the beauty of this theater called the American West, and the text describes this as like an in-between movie theater. It's post the big extravagant, I think it's the Xanadu theaters of the golden age of cinema, but it is before the boxy multiplexes that so dominated the 90s. I love those bulky boxy multiplexes, by the way, because that's all I knew in the 90s.
That's our
I remember
childhood.
when the first AMC multiplex opened near us, and we were like, "Holy shit, this is amazing!" But
Yeah,
I can see the hatred for them now in retrospect.
yeah. I mean, I get. It's honestly hard for me to see the hatred for them because that's like my teenage years were going to see movies with friends like every weekend, and it was awesome. I loved it. So I get that there's a sort of aesthetic downfall between these glorious
Yeah.
antique theaters and the multiplexes, but I'm sorry, I have too much nostalgia.
No, that's fair. But I do think it puts this theater and this metaphor in this really interesting place, right? This is a place of transition. It is not the old thing, but not the new thing quite yet, and is in this transition. And that puts the concept of the American West in a place of transition. And if you look at it, Desperation, the town itself, kind of perfectly encapsulates this idea. This is a mining town that is struggling to exist and carry on after the mine that basically defined its existence dried up. But new technology is coming now. New technology is coming that might unlock that mine again, that might take more potential from the ground. And the American West specifically and also broadly serves as perhaps an example of America's identity crisis at this point in history. We're hurtling towards the future, towards the roaring 90s we talked about, growth, change, new technology. We have a cell phone featured prominently in this movie or this book, sorry. But yet we have the remnants of the past as restless. We have this mine that's being opened up, and there's something down in there, something bad. And then the animals, as this new technology. What about the animals? And I don't know. There's a lot of symbolic imagery here. I think that's really interesting.
Totally agree. I mean, yeah, I totally thought about how symbolically rich this setting was before you pointed it out here. Totally. No, you're right. It's great. I mean, I think once again we have to mention that this book references Cormac McCarthy by name, and a huge amount of his work concerned the idea of the frontier, and the American westward expansion as basically this horribly violent process of destruction, essentially.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a lot of the imagery, like you just said, that's being conjured up here. As you go, you discover these resources, and in the course of exploiting the resources, you not only destroy the land, but you also kill a bunch of people and bury them, and then you try to forget about it, and you just call it the China Pit. But yeah, like another thing I was thinking about this week is that the whole vibe of the story, or the whole tone of the story, or the whole, I guess, genre of the story, kind of all of those things, is caught up in this space between like being a Western and being a Bible story and being like a modern horror novel. And I think that's why it's weird. Like it is a weird and kind of difficult to digest book. People in the Reddit and so forth have commented that they don't dislike it. I don't think people usually say they dislike the book. They just find it difficult and hard and like harsh.
Yeah.
And they kind of don't know what to do with it. And I think it's understandable because it's this pastiche of like a lot of kind of weird dissonant elements. Here, one of the major elements of the pastiche is literally the Bible. So it's like a biblical Western, but in the style of modern horror writer Stephen King. And that's just very strange. Now I'm actually loving this. I it's like just this being one of the stops on our journey through Stephen King, I'm just utterly delighted by, because it's just this weird turn of the kaleidoscope of the kinds of things that he likes to do.
Yeah.
But I can kind of see why people don't know what to do with the book,
Yeah, I mean, it is so interesting, and like, King has always talked about, like, there's always been Bible stuff in King. We've spent hours talking about, the metaphor and the symbology and the callbacks to Abrahamic religion and Christianity and all these things, right? But this is like almost the most explicit and intentional, direct kind of conversation about these whole things. Which is just a really fascinating choice. And like this is a thing that you didn't know going into it. Like, you didn't know this was the book. I think you could maybe reason it was a Western by looking at the cover, possibly. But yeah, it's just kind of super surprising that this is where we're going in this book.
Yeah, just to kind of double down on that, we've got characters like Mother Abigail in other Stephen King books. We've got other characters like that, but to me, the question of Mother Abigail is more like, like there is a higher power, and there is a force of good in the world, and we're not being too specific about what that is. Mother Abigail herself happens to be Christian, but that almost feels incidental to that book.
No, that's a great point, because I think The Stand is obviously the other most direct biblical allegory story that King has written, and I agree, it feels different. This is essentially, this similar things are happening, and that characters are moving through the will of God, but this, like, we used Ka and Gan and the White very interchangeably in those stories. It's not that we can't do that here. I think we can, but like, it also feels very much more specific to God. Here, like God, like, it's just God.
Yeah.
And that does make it kind of unique and interesting.
Totally agree. It's very specific. We're having biblical miracles performed by David. We're having and just overall, I think throughout the whole book, as we've talked about all these weeks, it seems to be much more overtly King exploring Christian faith specifically, not just
Yeah.
the idea of faith, but we we as like Americans in the 20th/21st century kind of forget that the water we swim in is so influenced by Christianity to the
Yeah.
point where it's just like, well, this is just what faith is. It's like, no, this is highly idiosyncratic and specific to the Christian faith
Yep.
and the way it is currently practiced in this period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happening in this book.
Yeah. And that in mind, we can kind of perhaps look at David as maybe King's example of what he thinks an ideal Christian should be. Maybe I don't even know. It might be too early to conclude on that, but
yeah,
I don't know. It's certainly a thing to think about.
yeah.
All right. So moving into it, I think that conversation went on way longer than I thought it would. But moving into the actual events of the story, Johnny is looking around now, calling their group the Kali and Trajan Survival Society. And I love the note where it says, and not entirely without affection there, which is like not a way of saying he likes these people, but he doesn't dislike these people.
Yeah, right. They're kind of growing on him, you could say.
Yeah. And I love this little bit of the text here as well. Above that, and on all sides as well, the desert wind howled. It was a sound that cooled Johnny's blood, but he could not deny the fact that there was also something strangely attractive about it, although what that attraction might be he didn't know. Oh, don't lie. You know. Billingsley and his friends knew it as well. That's why they came here. God made you hear that sound, and a room like this is a natural amplifier for it. You can hear it even better when you sit in the front of the screen with your old pals, throwing legendary shadows and drinking to the past. That's the sound says quitting is okay. That quitting is in fact the only choice that makes any sense. That sound is about the lure of emptiness and the pleasures of zero. I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah. It's funny. I kind of didn't know what to make of this at first. And later I realized that this connects to the idea of what Intragian kind of is this kind of aggressively nihilistic force.
Yeah.
That the lure of emptiness and the pleasures of zero sounds exactly like something that could have slotted into Intragian's, the creature, whatever, Intragian's internal monologue. And then also another thing I want to ping off here is like this addiction theme, which was mildly in the story before, really becomes a lot more prevalent and present rather in this in these chapters where we have the issue of Billingsley and the alcohol. And it's funny, when I was thinking all this over before, I was like, well, how does the addiction stuff connect to everything else? Like, I don't really get it. We have this story about faith and religion and meaning, and then we have this story about, we have these characters who struggle with addiction, and Johnny and Billingsley being alcoholics, Ralph being a gambler, arguably an addict, although sure, we'll just go with that for now. And then I'm like, well, I think addiction and like giving yourself over to your addiction is sort of like giving yourself over to the lure of emptiness, giving yourself over to the pleasures of zero. And that's how it connects to this spiritual battle between, the white and whatever it is that Intragian represents.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things going on with that I find really interesting. We're going to talk about the ways in which obedience to Tack versus obedience to God, and the ways in which those are handled differently, and the idea of perhaps belief, faith, whatever you want to call it, optimism, hope. These things are hard. Nihilism is easy. Giving yourself over to your addiction is easy. Staying the course is hard. And I think all these things kind of swirl around themselves, like chaos. I think the argument here is almost, and we'll see it when we get to see inside Intragian or Tack's head for the first time, or not the first time, but a recent time, that like chaos is almost the default and easy, and hopelessness is easy and the default, and belief is harder.
Yeah.
So I think all these things do swirl around together to line up in an interesting way.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So our characters are stressed and they're feeling temporarily safe for perhaps the first time in a while, and they began kind of goofing off. They began making shadow puppets on the movie screen, and joking around with each other, and it drives poor Audrey Weiler crazy. She's like, "Why aren't you all terrified? Why aren't you all freaking out right now? Why aren't you all talking about escape? Let's get out of here. Let's go." And this is stuff that plays really well and naturally in the moment, but also is fun looking back now that we know what we know about Audrey, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I actually, as you were going that, I was thinking like it came without packages. It came without bags. As like the Grinch can't believe that they're still happy despite the fact that they're not getting everything they wanted, and that's like pretty much exactly here. Like the demonic creature can't understand. Like, how is it that they can find joy in the situation when I've
right
when I've made everything so horrible for them?
mm-hmm,
How
mm-hmm.
can they be laughing? I, as you say, none of that occurred to me the first time.
No. First time, it just naturally comes off as a woman who has been through a horrible trauma for the past couple days, and like is not processing it the same way the rest of them are.
Yeah.
But yeah, it plays both ways with the knowledge of everything. Yeah, and the fact that she's like encouraging them. We need to leave. We need to go. We can't wait. Let's go outside, back to where the bad guys are waiting for us.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, so interspersed with that, there's just a lot of this creature being very clever, and it makes this tack entity seem even more formidable and clever because of what a good facade it's able to keep up. At no point does it slip into any sort of obvious, like, evil, insane behavior. It's a perfect performance.
She acts nothing like Intragian acted, which is interesting because like the bits of Intragian that we saw the demon or whatever we want to call it come out in that moment felt like it didn't have control. Like the constant like tack, like it felt like, oh, you were like, that's slipping out and you don't really have full, like the Edgar suit. Like that's the Edgar suit joke, right? Like it just felt like he's barely managing to keep up and like is actually doing a pretty bad job impersonating a human. But there's none of that in Audrey. There's none of the decay. There's none of the blood. There's nothing, which is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, so it is interesting because part of me thinks these are two heads of the same Hydra. And in fact, the thought I had was that since this is a Bible story, maybe this is just Legion. This is literally the Demon Legion, because because Legion is many. There's sort of multiple manifestations of this. But I do wonder. So. The fact that they seem to be distinctly different makes me think like it triggers that old thing I'm always looking for, which is that evil destroys itself. And I'm like, well, maybe by having, by splitting itself in two, now there's now room for disagreements and jealousies between these two manifestations of the same evil being, and they're going to actually destroy each other or destroy themselves.
I like that.
Just a thought, but it seems like the sort of thing that could happen here.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So and then the other thing that happens kind of recurrently throughout these sections, which we mentioned obliquely before, but basically that Billingsley keeps staring at her legs, and you and all the other characters think that he's just a horn dog. But we later find out that there's something that's nagging at him, and his eyes keep returning to her legs because it has something to do with her legs, but he just can't put his finger on it.
That's so fun because like it's almost like King playing with the fact that what a King novel is like, right? Like this is it's just another Stephen King hornball character that's just staring at this woman's legs, and it works perfectly as just that. But then we learn what it actually is, and it can still partially be that for sure. But like the subconscious reason why he's looking at these legs is because something isn't adding up for him.
Yep.
So yeah, it's perfectly set up. It works really, really well. I think it's such a fun reveal. I like it so much.
I agree.
Before they do anything, before they decide on anything they're going to do, though, Johnny says they need to talk. They need to palaver, if you will, share their stories and make a plan. And so here we have, once again, this thing that King just loves to return to. And man, I know we've talked about this before, Matt, but like there's just something delightful that I don't, it's not that this never happens in stories written by other authors. Like every story, not every story, but a lot of stories have this moment where characters like come together and talk and share information. But I don't know, I feel like it's a thing that is extremely important to King, that he has these chapters, and they always work, even if a lot or even most of the information is just rehash, like it still works.
Yeah, I agree. I'm always down for a palaver. I I mean, I think there's something actually pleasurable about watching characters share information.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've ever said it out loud quite that way before, but like, you know, when you've got a situation like this where you've got Steve and Cynthia off learning certain things, learning about the statue, having certain experiences, and then you've got our other group who, they see David performing miracles, they see the Tack doing things which Cynthia and David never saw. You really like, part of you is like, God, I really want these two groups to come together, share information, come to a better understanding of what's going on. It like frustrates you, and a lot of authors, honestly, it really frustrates me when their characters don't do that, because you're
Mm-hmm.
like, first of all, it's unrealistic. If there's a crazy life and death situation happening, people are going to try to figure it out. They're going to try to talk it out. It's a very human, natural reaction, and it creates artificial tension when the characters don't have that conversation, and it's just you just want to see it happen. You want to see it.
Yeah.
I've always actually personally, before we even did this project, I was like, it annoys me that authors don't give us the satisfying moment where the characters finally meet up and they share what's been going on.
Yeah.
Like, it drove me crazy, actually. Like in the Wheel of Time, there's like 10 books where characters don't see each other and they meet up again, and they meet up for like 5 minutes, and then and you're like, what? Like, that was such an opportunity for for like a great moment, and it was
Yeah.
just nothing, and that's actually the norm. So I actually really appreciate this particular thing about King.
I agree so much. And I think I think authors are afraid of doing it because it does feel like a rehash of information, or recycling information, that like the idea is, well, once the reader or watcher knows, like that's all that matters, is that they know. But no, actually what we're watching the show for is the characters, and we want to see the characters understand and digest this information. I mean, not to bring up an old wound, but like this was a problem that our favorite television show Lost frequently had,
Mm-hmm.
in that, like sometimes the problems would be solved, or there would be some greater understanding if every one of the characters just like sat down and talked through all the stuff that they were going through. And like there were moments in that show where it like made sense why they were not talking through and sharing these things. It totally did, but there's still like moments of like, God, just sit and talk to each other, please, you two. Like, you just learned some important information, and we don't get to see when you relayed that to the rest of the group. There's got to be some
Yeah.
reaction to it that is important to the characters.
Yeah.
And
Yes, because exactly, it's not about like you seeing the character say the information. It's about you seeing the other characters react to the information.
yeah,
And hear it for the first time. That's a character moment. Like, that's the kind of character moment that we come to stories for, is to watch people react to things that are shocking.
mm-hmm.
Oh
Yeah,
my God, you're telling me this guy, there's a giant cop who seems to be like swelling and rotting alive, and like, I want to see Steve's reaction when he hears about that.
yeah,
I don't want it to just be like they spoke for, they either gloss over it or just don't have the conversation, which is
sure.
really like the default thing that happens in books, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just delightful, and King does it frequently enough to where he recognizes that this is a real draw that people have. So
Yep.
yeah. I really love this little bit here where it says, kind of speaking of ways of just surveying our characters, we kind of have Johnny like look up and look over our group here. And it says, his smile faded a little and he turned to look at them. Audrey standing on the edge of the rug in her gawky, sexy dress. David squatting by the TV. Steve and Cynthia now sitting on the arms of an overstuffed easy chair that looked like it might have also come from the old Circle Ranch. Mary standing by the screen and looking school teacherly with her arms folded under her breasts. Tom Billingsley now inspecting the open upper cabinet of the bar with his hands tightly clasped behind his back. Ralph in the wing chair at the edge of the light with his left eye now puffed almost completely shut. The Kali and Trajan Survival Society, all present and accounted for. What a crew, Johnny thought. Manhattan Transfer in the desert. Manhattan Transfer is a vocal group, by the way.
Oh, okay.
In case you didn't know. Yeah.
No, I figured that was one of the pop culture references that he loves to make.
Yeah, they're just a very eclectic vocal group that sings all different kinds of music, and just a large group of people. It's a fitting reference there, but not one that I think most people will get nowadays.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I mean, that's just a way of like, oh, these are all their characters, and he even has them kind of like, I don't know why, but I love the detail of Steve and Cynthia are sitting on the arms of the same chair now. Like they're sitting together, but not quite together. It's just like, it should, out of everyone in the group, these two are the ones that have bonded together the most. And so we represent that with them sitting together there. I just really like it.
Don't they, maybe I misinterpreted it. Don't they like eventually get even closer together?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. Yeah. I mean, so I love that like our Audrey is sort of subtly torpedoing everything. Cause like,
yeah.
We it's funny. We just had this conversation about how sort of gratifying it is to watch characters share information, but actually what's happening here is deeper than that, because they're actually being obstructed from sharing information by the demon who is in their midst very subtly, being like, no, that's crazy, and it's like they have to have this stupid argument with her instead of just being like, all right, we're all on the same page. There's demons. What are we going to do about it? And so it is actually plot, not just sharing information.
Yeah, no, you're so right. This is the fun thing about looking back on this in retrospect is everyone has kind of collectively agreed that there's something more going on here, something supernatural, something powerful. Most of these people witnessed David get out of the cell. They've kind of seen how this thing has played out. They've seen weird animals, and she is the only one absolutely refusing to accept this, refusing to admit to any kind of additional information or additional plausible explanation for this thing. And it comes off, I think it doesn't come off suspicious in the moment, but yeah, in retrospect, it's like, oh, she's trying to stall their progress for sure.
Because she didn't see any of this stuff at all. And so it's a big ask, but totally. Yeah, it's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's one thing we haven't talked about before here. And I do want to talk about that with you a bit, because when we talked about David, and we talked about David's kind of specialness and how the group has realized that David is special. But we didn't talk about like the actual miracle of the escaping from the prison cell. The basically what Tom Billingsley is saying in this moment is what David did there was an absolute miracle, because there's no way his head ever would have fit. There's just no possible way he would have fit through that cell. And so doing so had to have been some sort of supernatural thing, some sort of miracle, something beyond just the normal that soap would have greased him up enough to get through. And it's interesting because we didn't talk about this at the time. You didn't mention this in your mind as something that you felt was completely unbelievable and supernatural. I'm wondering if you just kind of accepted that the bars were big enough, or did the book not communicate this clear enough? I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I just kind of took the book's word at its word. The book at its word. It makes no sense because it's a book and it doesn't have a word. But the book did say, hey, the book basically explained to us the characters' thought processes, which were like, jails are made for grown-ups, and 11-year-old's head is probably small enough to fit through the bars. Sure. I think maybe a small part of me was like, are they? I mean, I haven't seen a lot of jails, so I can't really say how wide the bars are, but I would guess they're pretty thin, because then you're like, well, like an 11-year-old boy probably is about the same size as a lot of adult women. So like, wouldn't you make the bars able to keep an adult woman inside? Like, sure. But you don't think all these things because it's fine. You just
no, yeah. I mean, like the book does make special attention to show how like his head kind of squeezed in to get out, but like the head is not fully rigid, right? Like it can it can move a little bit. So you just kind of take it at its word. And I do wonder um, if I do wonder if like the book could have been, I don't know, does it want to be clear in that moment and say definitively, oh, this was something special happened here?
Well,
Or is it wanting to us to kind of get to this moment and go, oh, I never really thought about it that way, and I'm not sure about that.
well, I think, well, okay, the second one, I think, because at the time, like specifically, the book says that he felt this sense of like disorientation and so forth when he finally got his head out from between the bars. And even at the time, that actually struck me as weird, because I'm like, well, wait a second, like it'd be one thing for it to like really badly scrape the sides of your head, right, like painfully, but your skull doesn't really flex. And if it were to flex, like if it were to flex enough to actually cause you to feel disoriented, that your skull would be cracked. And you'd have much worse problems than being disoriented briefly. So I actually think in retrospect that David sort of taking a minute and staggering around and collecting himself was like, yeah, his skull kind of became a little squishy for a second. It kind of squished through. His brain got a little bit squished, and then his skull went back to normal, and then he was fine. And that was the miracle. Like it doesn't, because otherwise the moment where he feels kind of disoriented and I don't remember how exactly it's described, but it's a very distinct way where it's like he doesn't just act like, ow, that hurt. He acts like he has brain damage for a second.
Okay. Yeah, no fair. So, I mean, should we have just not, or should we have challenged this more, I guess?
I feel like I should have challenged it more, because I do remember noticing, like, it's kind of weird that he reacts this way. Like, that doesn't really make sense as a physiological reaction. But I'm always willing to just be like, I don't know, I've never squeezed my head through something really tight before. Maybe that would happen. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do think it's interesting that, like, even on this read through, I was trying to read it with this in mind and being like, are we being hinted at this? We don't need to spend more time on this. I just think it is interesting that it didn't come up until the book kind of reminded us of it and said specifically, hey, this was kind of magic that what just happened there.
No, I think this is worthy of discussion. I don't think this is like a tangent, because like all these miracles that are happening go completely unaddressed by us, because they are these mundane miracles where it's like, sure, like that could have been nothing. David's friend could have just recovered from his coma, naturally. Could have been nothing. That's the nature of all of them, is that there's only this tiny little totally ignorable niggling thing where it's like, that doesn't quite seem right, but okay. And then you just forget about it. Mm-hmm. That's, and that happens over and over. I think that's intentional. So I think you're right to ask this question of like, how could we have reacted differently to that? And it's like, sure, well, I mean, yeah, we could be like ridiculously hyper vigilant at all times, but I think that's kind of what we're saying about the nature of these miracles, is that they're by their very nature very easy to miss, very hard to catch.
Sure. Until this week's reading, right, where they become much more obvious and referential.
Yeah.
So we cut briefly away from our group and briefly over to Tack. We're just gonna call him Tack now, Matt. The good. Mountain Lion does, so we're just gonna do it because I'm tired of saying it or Kali and Trajan / Ellie Carver / the thing that lives inside. Like, so just Tack. Okay, yeah. Let's just do this.
Sounds good.
And the section gives us perhaps a slight window into Tack's worldview or purpose or what have you. I really liked this, and I thought it was worth talking about. Yes, feckless boy, rude boy, foolish boy. In some ways, that last was the best, wasn't it? The truest. Foolish prey boy, trying to make at least some part of it come right, as if any part of a thing like this ever could be, as if death were an obscenity that could be scrubbed off life's wall by a strong arm, as if the closed book could be reopened and read again with a different ending. That's some really fascinating stuff there, right? I mean, this feels like one of those key paragraphs, actually, to what this book is discussing.
Particularly by the author of The Dark Tower.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's almost like the question is like, is there something redeemable about the world or not is the sort of epic struggle between these philosophical forces. We've got this very anti-life, nihilistic, sort of gleefully, aggressively nihilistic, even angry at the idea of anything mattering,
Mm-hmm.
is the vibe you get from Intragian Tack here. And again, references, I think, some of the stuff that Johnny has been thinking about, the nature of succumbing to your worst impulses.
Right. Yep.
And then on the other side, you've got this interesting idea of this God who only provides miracles that you can't actually pin down.
Yeah.
And I think the characters loving each other and finding meaning and hope and happiness in their ability to connect to each other even in this horrible situation. Like, I think that's another consistent King thing is like actually I'm going to belabor this point here because I don't think there's a particularly better place to belabor it this week, but like the thing between Cynthia and Steve is great because, like, on the one hand, there's like this spiritual meeting of minds where they admire each other, like they think they're funny and cool and brave and great, and then also they want to fuck like rabbits, and these are like two different levels that are both aspects of humanity. It's the Sarks aspect and the Numa aspect. It's the pink and the red, and this book turns it into a kind of spiritual struggle actually between those two. It twists it around such that kind of like we're talking about here, it's all now it's framed in terms of this dyad between this Tack force and this God force, and in a more explicit way than I think we've done before. So I'm just really, really digging that whole aspect of things.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that a lot. So, I mean, I want to, like, that line that I love the most is as if death were an obscenity that could be scrubbed off life's wall by a strong arm. Because this is, I think kind of one of the core ideas around Christianity and perhaps faith is this idea of conquering death, right? Like, this is what Jesus did. Jesus, gave his life and conquered death and opened the way to eternal life, basically, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, one side you have this idea of death is a thing that we go through, but there is something beyond death. There is something that exists out there, whether you want to call it heaven in the strict Christian terms or whatever belief system you abide by. There is something beyond death. And then you have the other side, the Tack side, that clearly says is that death is an obscenity, and it is this awful obscenity that is meaningless, and it just happens and it's over and that's it, and it's awful, and you have like this idea of faith standing in the way of that and saying like no, it's not the end. I really like that idea and how it like starts to tie in everything we've been talking about over the past few weeks.
Yeah, I like that a lot, specifically focusing on the idea of death. That's super relevant when you've got characters whose loved ones are dying all around them and they have to find some way of dealing with that.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're sitting here kind of thinking like, so why is Tack killing everyone, right? Like let's pretend for a moment that it needs bodies to exist, right? Like it needs a host, which is a fair assumption. We've seen it in now 3 hosts, I guess, and 2 of them appear to be collapsing and rotting, so it's going to need more. Wouldn't it be beneficial to keep as many people around as possible to transition to? But it seems to take glee and joy in death and killing, and not just killing, but like the display of death as this thing that we specifically don't want people to be able to brush off. And so it's like this kind of quest to prove that this is meaningless, that this is awful, that everything's terrible. Like it's a quest to prove nihilism by making it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I don't think it even values its own existence. So I think that's one answer to why it doesn't bother trying to keep other bodies alive, is it's like it just wants to kill as many people as it can in some time frame.
Sure.
And then it's done basically.
Mm-hmm.
um,
So this section of the book ends with the spider spies returning and letting Tack know where our friends are all hiding out in the theater. They do this, by the way, by spelling the word theater, like a marching band. The book says, which is pretty fucking cool, actually.
Yeah.
Suck that, Charlotte. Your web messages sucked.
Yeah, well, it's like you said about Charlotte. I wonder what nefarious plot that Crimson King had Charlotte working on to communicate these dark messages. Yeah, it's cool. It's a very cool scene. It's always cool when you sort of briefly get to glimpse into the head of this monster, and not too much to kind of take away the mystery of it, but just enough to make it seem creepy and weird and otherworldly.
Yeah, and to help understand maybe like help starting to position the themes and what like the antagonist versus the protagonist, like the wants and needs of these characters are. I think because like all we really knew about Tack up until this point was like, I'm the only law west of the Picos, and it's like, okay, well, what does that mean actually?
Yeah.
And now we're starting to know what law and order means to a creature like this is that everyone dies actually, and it's meaningless.
Yeah, I like that.
So Matt, last week we talked about how this book had mostly centered on like an Old Testament version of God. But this week we get our real first like specifically Jesus-y thing going on, right? Because David makes some loaves and fishes duplicate. I never I never know how to explain this stuff on the show, Matt, because I don't know how like wildly familiar these stories are. I think most people know about the miracle of the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, right? Where Jesus like took this little tiny bit of food and split it, and somehow like over 500 people all got to eat their fill off of this little tiny bit of food. I think people know about that, right?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the ones that I remember from childhood, so it feels like one that everyone knows, but
yeah,
that's never a safe assumption.
It's definitely one of the Jesus greatest hits for sure. So I
sure.
feel like most people, like I think it's become a little ubiquitous in pop culture that like we just know of that. It's referenced often.
Yeah, so. I think I'm trying to think of like what is loaves and fishes to me is just an instant like the Jesus miracle. So
but this time it's crackers and sardines,
which is delightful. I feel very dumb that I didn't get it until one of the characters was like, it's bread and fish, it's bread and fish, it's loaves and fishes. And I mean it seems it's very fun because it's like it's not like they're fed. It's not like they're full, it's just like, well, it seemed like there weren't enough sardines, but actually there were enough sardines.
There's just enough. Yeah. You don't get to gorge yourself, but you're enough to be satisfied.
Yeah.
Somewhat. Yeah. And that is interesting. So I guess the thing you can talk about here is, okay, so this is a very clear Jesus analog for our little boy here. And we have to ask ourselves the question now, is that what we're doing now? Are we making David into 1990s Jesus? And if so, I don't know if you guys know the story, but it doesn't end too well for the J-Man.
Yeah.
I guess let's yes, obviously he's resurrected and like becomes one with God. And so, I mean, in the long term, it ends very well for Jesus, right? And humanity. But in the short term, there's the whole crucifixion thing. And if we're setting up David to be a Jesus analog, you start to go, oh no.
Yeah. Well, no, I think all of that is key though. Like I was thinking about, first of all, I think you're right. I mean, I think thematically it would make a lot of sense for David to die for the sins of the larger group, or for the redemption of the larger group, you could say. I don't like this, by the way. I hate this idea that you've suggested, but it would make a lot of sense. Like Jesus, David here even has sort of a dark night where he gets really angry at God for taking away his sister and mother, and he doesn't understand why.
Yeah,
and
his the Gethsemane moment, sure.
the Gethsemane moment, and it also reminds us of Job, who had
Mhm.
his moment of being like, why'd you do this to me, and but never actually losing faith, right? And then in the end, I think, again, like you just said, critical to remember, both Job and Jesus are characters who go through enormous amounts of suffering, for different reasons, obviously, but in the end, both of them are rewarded with, outsized, basically textually, explicitly, much rewarded much more than they ever suffered.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and we'll see what form that takes, if we do go down this path. But I feel like that's the idea, is like, you've got to suffer to earn grace, or
Sure.
something like that.
Yeah, no, I like that. Well, we'll see. It's just fun to like start to see these trends and begin to worry.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the group continues to recount their stories, and we talked about the ways in which Audrey's Audrey's involvement goes to distract them, and we also talked about the palaver already and how much we love that. I did like really like, as we finally move to Audrey's story, we see that Tom actually knows her, having taken care of her horse a year or so ago, and this is once again kind of laying the seeds for what happens, right? There's a connection between these two characters. Oh, interesting. Okay, we don't know what to do with that yet, but okay, we'll just file that away and go on.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that Audrey was very reasonable here, explaining the mining processes, and then you later learn that she's a literal demon. So
Can we talk about this mining process, Matt? Because
sure.
so it turns out what they're doing
Uh-huh.
is the copper mine has been long dead, but there's this new way to leach the copper out of the ground using sulfuric acid. And they do this by just putting sulfuric acid in sprinklers and just watering the ground.
Uh-huh.
So it turns out what this does is pool and puddle, and then birds land in it and die.
Uh-huh. Sometimes you got to make an omelet, you got to break a few bald eagle eggs, Scott.
Don't worry though, Matt. They've switched to a new system that instead of just sprinkling the water, it's way more expensive, so much more expensive, but it just slowly kind of drips the water directly into the soil. This will probably not kill any animals because, as we all know, no animal lives underground.
Yeah, not any that I care about, that's for sure. Not any photogenic megafauna like bald eagles. So, that's all I care about.
Yeah, I mean, King doesn't come right out and say, "Hey, this is pretty fucked up, isn't it?" But he kind of also does in that, like, "Hey, this is pretty fucked, isn't it? That what we're doing here is
like that." I unironically, like, having Audrey explain it in very reasonable terms, I was like, "Hey, yeah, I mean, sure, you gotta mine the copper somehow." And then it's like, yeah, she's Satan.
Yeah. We cut away from this scene and go back over to Tak, who is sending a mountain lion to spy and perhaps deal with the prey boy and his friends. In this moment, we do get to see that Ellen Carver is not doing good. She's already starting to bleed and break down, and we get this line: "Fucking yeast infection." Nothing more than that, at least to start with. So I guess the implication here, Matt, is that whatever ailment is in the person is perhaps like hypercharged when they're tackified, just like they grow bigger. Perhaps the ailment is made bigger.
Yeah, it's like, it reminds me of the idea of pestilence as like a force of, plague of evil, of satanic power, and it's like, once again, evil destroys itself. So honestly, my brain also went to like Warhammer 40k, Nurgle, demons that are just like constantly rotting and being gross and everything, which is, so I'm just gonna, great, now I'm gonna imagine this is all being related to Warhammer 40k from now on. That makes me really happy, actually.
Okay, great, Matt. So we leave this behind and begin chapter 2, where we kind of start to tell Audrey's story for the first time. We learn that she went out into the wilderness camping for a few days, but came back for a business meeting with the boss. This is why she's wearing the dress, she says, calling our attention to the dress once again, but not in a way that makes us suspicious of anything yet, really. Aubrey comes back to a dead town, but Audrey, sorry, comes back to a dead town, though not as quite as interesting as or not as quite as dead rather as the town when we saw it.
Yeah. Yeah. I really enjoy listening to the story, by the way. I mean, because we've been, one of the mysteries of the story has been like, what happened exactly? How long has it been happening? And Audrey gives us a fairly satisfying blow by blow, even if some of it's probably made up. I feel like a lot of it probably isn't made up.
Yeah, a fun part of the game, in retrospect, the game is kind of starting to try to figure out which part of the story is made up and which part of it isn't. You know, like is everything from the beginning bullshit, or is everything leading up to the moment in the laundromat true? And it's when Tack was in the laundromat with her and literally smelled her there that that she started making stuff up. You just don't know.
Yeah.
It does kind of force you to look at the story as like, how much of this do we want to believe? But even so, it does feel like a lot of this probably just happened the way it's being told here.
Yeah, right. Like why lie, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to point out here is Johnny's reaction to Audrey telling the story. We get this line here. She spoke with a calm Johnny recognized. He had seen it in Vietnam, in the aftermath of half a dozen firefights. He'd seen it as a non-combatant, of course, notebook in one hand, pen in the other, tape recorder slung over his shoulder on a strap with a peace sign pinned to it, watching and listening and taking notes and feeling like an outsider, feeling jealous. The bitter thoughts which had crossed his mind then, eunuch in the harem, piano player in the whorehouse, now struck him as insane. So we talked about Johnny's Vietnam experience a little before, like we made rough reference to it, but we never really focused on it. And I think that's worth doing here because he went to Nam, he went to war, but not like in the normal sense, right? He was there to report, he was there to observe. And so he has these memories of Vietnam that he's referring to pretty often in these chapters as he's kind of seeing the way people are recounting information. Like he goes back to the Vietnam well fairly regularly, and but it's not as someone who's really experienced the trauma themselves. It's as someone just kind of getting the trauma relayed to them secondhand.
Mm-hmm.
And it just occurs to me that the other thing we talked about was David with this childhood play area, these woods, the Ho Chi Minh Trail and the Viet Cong lookout. These are Vietnam names and places, and this kid has just kind of decided that that's what these are called without any real understanding or reference to what they mean or the trauma behind it. And so like it's just another way in which David and Johnny link up and connect and compare to each other, I think.
Yeah, I like that. I don't remember at what point we learned that Johnny was a journalist and not a combatant. I think it was prior to this week, but
it was, yeah.
I don't remember if we talked about it or not. But yeah, it is interesting. He's acquainted with the evils of the world, but he's sort of apart from them. He's sort of an observer. That is interesting parallel with David. I agree.
And the jealousy, I think, is so interesting too, right?
Yeah,
like he's listening to these people tell of these horrible experiences they went through, and he's jealous a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely wild. Absolutely wild.
Yeah.
So Audrey tells the story of how she wound up with the group. She saw dead people hiding from Intragian. We're going to move quickly through this, but I think it's worth discussing the ways in which King, like through Audrey, like draws this incredibly tense situation. Like this is woman that is almost panicked by fear, like hiding on the ground, scared to move, unable to move. Like it's there's a lot of really solid writing in this stuff, but as we talked about already, you got to just be like, is this real? How much of this is real? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what to believe here.
I mean, I feel like my just reader reaction is that it was all real, except he didn't just walk away.
Yeah.
And because I mean, obviously he got her. The question is when, and this seems like a moment when, in some sense, he probably should have, because like he's totally psychic. So the idea that he's just like not gonna like find a person who's hiding when he's psychic and has like spiders doing his bidding, it's like he knew she was there.
And he's talking to her. Like this is the one moment where like it makes you doubt the story, because he's like, I know you're here. I smell you. Is that opium I smell? Is that the perfume you're wearing? Like he knows she's there, and then
Yeah.
just stays there silent for a few minutes and then just leaves.
Yeah.
Like that feels iffy.
Yeah. I had the same. Well, speaking of being too dumb to pick up on things, which is the theme of this week's reading, like I think even at the time I was like, that's weird. Like it would be one. It would be one thing if he hadn't ever found her and she just stayed hidden. But the idea that he like knew she was there and then he just left, it's like that doesn't make any sense. Oh well, and then I just went on with it.
Yeah, no, it is again a perfect construction of like he's rolling the dice and willing to bet that you're not going to pick up on that stuff, even though it's right there in front of you. And he's right. He's like, King totally understands the way people process information and stories, and can just be like, yeah, you might like look at that weird, and like it might sit in the back of your mind in a similar way to her short skirt is sitting in the back of Tom's mind, but like you probably won't actually be able to do the work of connecting those together.
Yeah, I agree.
So Audrey's story complete. The decision they find themselves with is now what to do. Audrey says she knows a way out of town and that they should head there in the morning. Once again, in retrospect, this is very suspicious. Is she lying about the way out of town? Who knows?
Yeah.
But David himself doesn't want to leave. He doesn't want to leave without his mother. And he's really resistant to the idea that they get out of here. And the group is like, no, sorry, this is what we got to do. And I think he basically says, you guys go, I'm going to stay. And they say no. He says, no, Billingsley said. Something in his voice made David raise his head. Not with other lives at stake. Not when you're special the way you are. We need you, son. That's not fair, David almost whispered. No, Billingsley agreed. His lined face was stony. It ain't. So fair.
Yep. Like, not fair. Yep. God is cruel. It's not fair.
Yep. It's not fair. It's not fair. None of this is fair, David, but it's a situation.
Yep.
And we do get to see a little bit of that innocency waver here in David, Matt. We talked last week about how he was kind of a unique character in this idea of he seems to just kind of follow without doubt. But here we get a little bit of that. He says, I don't know what to do. I know I need to ask God to help me straighten out my head, but right now I'm so mad at him that I can't. Every time I try to compose my mind, that gets in the way. He let the cop take my mother. Why? Jesus, why? So yeah, it's a little kink, little tear, little rip, little crack, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, so what's interesting is this is where my lack of really being a theologian will be my downfall, because like my feeling about this is that as long as he continues to obey God, he's still free to rage and to even question, because we know that Job raged at God. We know that Jesus asked why God had forsaken him. Yeah, and yet these guys, they both end up winning in the end metaphysically. So I think the innocency is still fine as long as he continues to do as he is told, which is another like that's a whole nother interesting can of worms, though, right? Because like it's if you can be angry at God but obey God, and that's the right choice. That actually says a lot about the nature of God and the nature of how all this works in the story.
I agree. No, I agree. We will see, but it is. I agree that this is not like, oh, David is at risk of becoming a non-believer. It's just that I'm mad at God right now, and I'm having trouble understanding the point of all this.
Yeah, right. It would be strange to become a non-believer after all the miracles, but
sure. I mean, that's kind of what happens in this moment, right? Steve looks at this. This is, by the way, the moment that felt weird that it was Steve to me, that I was talking about in the introduction, where Steve like looks at him and his reaction to this is like, hey, you just did a whole ass miracle a few moments ago, and you're not even recognizing that. I mean, I think this is a good line to say, but it just didn't feel Steve to me. But that's besides the point. I like that, like, Steve looks at this and like says there's a contradiction between being able to work miracles through God while not understanding him. And I think I think that's normal to me, actually. That's just like, I have no idea what's going on. I don't understand it. I don't get the why, but I'll still do it. I'll do what you need me to do.
I really like that, and I think it has to be that way because no one has a full understanding of God or God's plan or their role in it. So
sure,
all you can ever do is have faith that you're doing the best you can, right?
Yeah. Well, that's I think where the God is cruel as a statement said by a reverend like becomes true, right? In that like, well, sure, like you look at these things from your perspective, from your point of view, from your inability to understand and know and process, and yeah, that sure looks fucking cruel to me, right? But is there something more that you can't see and perhaps never could see? Possibly. Like if we're dealing with an all-powerful, all-knowing deity, like there has to be a separation of ability to understand the complex maneuverings of the universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So we also cut over once again to our cougar, our mountain lion, who's at Tack's command and has come to the theater and is kind of just laying in wait. There's an interesting thing here, Matt, that I wanted to talk to you about briefly, because we see here that the animal has basically been turned to Tack's will so that there's, quote, no question of disobedience. And I like this, especially coming like right after the moment where David's like, I want to ask God for help. I want to ask God what to do next, but I'm just so fucking mad at him right now that I can't do it. And then we compare that pretty directly with, if we want to call Tack a god of a certain variety, and then the mountain lion's ability to have independence and free will in its obedience to that god, which it doesn't. Like, see here, there was no question of disobedience. It's not, there's no choice here. You have been kind of pulled into obedience through whatever magic is going on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't exactly know what to do with this, but it does, I guess it makes me feel like this is yet more of our, Sarks versus Numa, the low versus the high, the pink versus the red stuff, actually, where it's like the animal, if humans are divided between the animal nature and a sort of spirit nature, then that implies that animals are all animal nature, right? So the animal is all Sarks, you could say, or maybe just has the barest whiff of Numa, and thus, because it is just sort of a flesh creature, it is fully susceptible to this demonic influence, whereas a human is only like half susceptible to that influence, like how we saw Steve and Cynthia struggle against the influence of the statue, because they have that human, that Numa side, but their physical side is seemingly wholly enthralled to it. But this being a mountain lion, it doesn't have that Numa. So
yeah, no, I like that. As we all know from the Catholic Catechism, animals have no souls.
Yep.
So
your cat is gone.
And also easily convinced by the devil to do its bidding.
Wait, didn't the Pope change this though?
I don't know. The current Pope?
Yeah, I thought the current Pope said to some boy like, oh no, I think it was I don't think it was about an animal. I think it was like some kid was like, is my mom in heaven, even though she wasn't Catholic? And he was like,
oh yeah, he said yes.
And he said yes, and then
everyone got really mad at him.
Everyone got really mad, despite the fact that because he said it, it's now true. So
yeah, that's
tough shit. Be a better Catholic.
The tricky nature of the infallibility of the leader of the Catholic Church.
That's right.
You can't actually disagree with what he says.
Yeah.
Because he speaks the voice of God. Oops. Well, hoisted by our own petard.
Yep. Indeed.
So Matt, the other thing we learned from the mountain lion here is that the miners had, quote, reopened the bad place, meaning the China pit. So I think we kind of suspected this already, but whatever is going on here seems to originate from this pit.
Yeah. Yep. Very fun to subsequently learn that the China Pit makes the Overlook Hotel look like a church in terms of relative level of hauntedness.
Oh, we'll get there, Matt. Don't you worry. We'll get there.
I can't wait. I do. I'm glad to have been vindicated that there was at least something interesting about the name, the China Pit.
Yeah, you were really close, Matt.
Uh huh.
So close.
In a sense.
We begin chapter 3, our final chapter of the week, with Tom, who will basically be the focal point of this chapter and will not leave it alive. Is wrestling. He's on his way to drunk, and it's our good friend Johnny who got him that way. Johnny kind of recognizes that it was all his fault, but also tries like really hard not to take credit for it. I love this. The central contradiction that is Johnny is in this paragraph here. No, damn it, the gun wasn't the issue. Keeping the old man wired together enough to be some help, that was the issue. Well, maybe it felt a little bogus, but you have to give yourself the benefit of the doubt in some situations, especially in the crazy ones, which this certainly was. Either way, it maybe hadn't been such a good idea. He had a large number of not such good ideas in his life, and if anyone was qualified to recognize one when he saw it, John Edward Marinville was probably that fellow. So he like waffles back and forth between definitely not my fault, just I was not motivated by anything other than just trying to maintain this guy, but maybe that was a bad idea. But no, how can I be? It's just like he's everything all at once.
Yeah, and also he's not admitting that part of his motivation was to kind of like bring the guy low as kind of a power play.
Yeah,
which absolutely was in there, but he's not capable of admitting that he has those motivations.
Totally, yeah. I also really love this part. He had been on the cover of Time. He had also fucked America's sweetheart. Well, maybe that was sort of retroactive or something. She hadn't really been America's sweetheart since 1965 or so, but he had still fucked her.
I love this. This is my favorite type of Stephen King character, is a writer who's extremely full of shit, and totally lacks self-awareness.
Yeah, no, he and like it's so fun. It's so like this is why this character is actually enjoyable despite being a total piece of shit that is a liar and like just watching him manipulate himself, I think is really funny.
Yeah, sure.
The one thing I did want to talk to you about with this is alcoholism a little bit though. So Johnny decides to fix the mistake he made by taking the booze away from a borderline drunk Billingsley, which, man, it's so sad. Like Billingsley's reaction and like the please, the gimme, the it's so sad and so awful. And I wonder, like I was thinking about this as I read this week's section, because we can look at King's depiction of Tom Billingsley as a non-recovered alcoholic, and maybe even Johnny Marinville as a recovering alcoholic, with King's depiction of Jack Torrance. These characters are all, at least when in the Tom and Jack of it, are both like late stage alcoholics. But one was a character crafted and built by King prior to getting sober, and the other, Tom, is after. And I wonder if there's something we could do here with that. Like how has King's view on alcoholism changed in the 20 some odd years between these two, and in getting sober and being able to look at this stuff and himself perhaps a little bit more objectively after getting through it, because I think they are depicted differently, right? Yeah. I think Tom is sadder and more pathetic than Jack Torrance was, which is not to say Jack Torrance wasn't pathetic, but I don't know. Tom feels like a person written from the perspective of a person who has just an incredible amount of sympathy for what this person is going through.
Yeah.
And I never felt that with Jack.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Jack is the way that Homer Simpson remembers himself being at the party, and Billingsley is how Homer Simpson actually behaved at the party. And I agree that like with Jack and with like Ben Mears all the way back in Salem's Lot, there's like a kind of tinge of romance to it all, to the idea of like being a tortured writer who just has, they're just so sensitive and they feel so strongly, and their mind is just so powerful that they and they're so full of like struggle and angst that they just have to treat themselves with this this medicine. almost. And there's an awareness that this is a character flaw, but it's like a romantic sort of Byronic character flaw. And I think, 20 years later, King is like, it's fucking pathetic.
Yeah.
Grow up, cut that shit out.
Yeah.
It's not Byronic. It doesn't come off as sexy. It's and I think he has a lot of disgust for it, but also I think you're right that he does have a lot of sympathy, but it's more like pity, right? It's more like pity than like any kind of sense that there's a nobility there,
No, I think you're right. I do think that, and just like the way he gives Billingsley at the end of this chapter like a final moment of redemption, but then still says that it was specifically his alcoholism that led to this happening. Both in that he was too drunk to kind of make the connection in his head that perhaps sober he would have been able to make easier, but the reason he's in the bathroom in the first place is because he snuck in there to get his liquor stash.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think this is really clear, and I really enjoy this because it's not that like King was wrong. Like I don't know enough to say like King's depiction of alcoholism with Jack Torrance is wrong. I'm not even saying that. It's just his view on this whole thing has changed as he's grown up and had life experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all the subtleties of sort of tone, right?
Yeah,
it's to be clear, Jack Torrance is a massive self-deceiving asshole throughout that whole book too. It's just I do think there is this I think part of it is just that book is gothic horror, and the gothic horror tone kind of requires a Byronic protagonist,
Sure.
so maybe that's part of why it comes off that way in that particular book, but overall I think the trend is there.
I do like what you said about self-deceiving, because I do think that's the biggest difference between Jack Torrance's alcoholism and Tom Billingsley's alcoholism is Jack Torrance constantly lies to himself about all of this, and Billingsley seems to know exactly what his problem is. He's like, I think he says like, oh, this pull, this itch turned a little bit more into a something deeper as he went along. And I think Billingsley perhaps represents King's realization that an alcoholic that's in the middle of suffering with this disease like knows they're an alcoholic. They don't need to lie to themselves about their need for drink. They just can't stop. Like they it can sit there and grab a drink knowing this is the worst possible choice I could make in this very moment, but I have to do it anyway.
Right.
And I do think that's a distinct difference in how Torrance and Billingsley are drawn.
Yeah, I think you're totally right.
That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah.
I also want to point out that in the opening seconds of this chapter, Mary was the one that started walking towards Tom to help, prevent his drunkenness. And Johnny pulls her back hard. He does this hard. He grabs her wrist and pulls. And it's clear here, like the text makes this actually pretty clear that he did hurt her in this moment. Like he hurt her wrist. And the book mentions this a few more times. Like we're seeing once he just sees that, a redness has formed around her wrist. In another scene, like he notices that she's kind of rubbing it as if it hurts. But Johnny always manages to shrug it off as just like, whatever. And I'm really fascinated. Like the domestic violence tendencies of Johnny Marinville were established basically in the first sentence that we met him, right? Like it says almost in the first couple sentences that he beat up one of his ex-wives, or maybe not wives. I don't remember. I think it was a wife. He assaulted her, and yet, like I just feel like because when we're with Johnny so often, we're in his head. The domestic violence, that portion of him, the woman hating domestic violence portion of him is so pushed the periphery that we only get to see it in these little bits and pieces. It's really interesting to me.
Yeah, there's been a few moments throughout, not just this woman hating, but also this like level of anger that's within him that's repressed. I mean, I think the closest to the surface it came was this moment where it's like, back when Trajan was sort of torturing him, where it's like his real addiction had always been to anger.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm like, well, he's probably also really addicted to alcohol, sure, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think he has a very short fuse, and we see the consequences of that. And I guess what's interesting here is we see him being in denial about the fact that he hurt a woman yet again.
Mhm.
So he hasn't really dealt with that aspect
No.
of himself.
No, and it forces us to kind of reckon with, is this going to matter? Like at some point, like it's something that's there. It's been set up from the beginning, and it's a through line through his character. How is this going to matter to the story? Is it? I don't know.
Yeah.
So they take the booze away from Tom, but Johnny promises to manage him, giving him a little bit every so often, so he doesn't go full cold turkey. Which is great plan. It's a really great plan.
No, I feel like this is another of those elements where you're meant to question it, actually, because it's like okay, you gave him like a couple drinks, stop. Like you don't need to let him get drunk. In fact, I actually question the whole idea of like this, like, oh well, we gotta hold on, everybody. I, as the expert alcoholic, I gotta manage this guy, and let me titrate the alcohol. It's like, sit down. Like, what do you think you're doing? You know, it's weird. It's a weird, like, paternalistic, like, thing he's doing. I don't even think he remotely understands the reasons why he's actually doing this. And I think the reasons he's actually doing it is that he wants a drink. He would love to get drunk in this situation. And he's like projecting.
Yeah. And I mean, there is some truth to the idea that like people with serious addictions, like, are eased off of them in this way. Like they do this with heroin, right? Where, they will not, if a person is like truly addicted to heroin and opiates, they will not like shut you. They will help ease you down off of it. But those are doctors doing that in controlled situations where they're able to monitor you very carefully, right? This is not, you are not an expert of this at all. And of course, the thing he doesn't know is that, hey, Tom has access to more alcohol than just the stuff you have. So it's just, it was a terrible, terrible plan from the beginning, and it continues to be a terrible plan.
I mean, so to be clear, like, alcohol is one of the only drugs that you can actually die from withdrawal.
Yeah.
So it's not that this is not an issue at all. I just don't think that Johnny is being honest about the actual reasons for his actions here.
Sure. And he's not the best person to do this. Like he's not, like, he takes it upon himself. Like, and that's the interesting thing about Johnny. And we see it here at the end of this chapter. He takes the mantle of leadership on himself almost without being asked.
Mm-hmm.
And then constantly like fails to act in that role when it's actually needed.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Mm-hmm. So one of their plans to kind of distract Tom is to have him tell the story, the history of Desperation and of the China Pit specifically. And this is where we get this story. Hey, Matt. Remember when you thought it was named the China Pit because it was so deep that it almost went to China? Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
It's
cute, right? It's kind of quaint.
It's so adorable.
Kind of charming.
Yeah, it turns out the real reason is because they hired a bunch of Chinese men and women to work in this incredibly unsafe mine shaft. And when it collapsed, they left them there to be buried alive. It's America.
Fuck yeah. If I'm not mistaken, they were like, welp, and then they just like buried them the rest of the way in.
Yeah.
So they like actively
caved in the rest
them.
of the shaft.
They caved in the rest of the shaft just to kind of make sure.
It's the only way to be sure.
Which just makes it seem even more comically evil.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is really actually important that King has done this, though, because I do think, like, I think it would be it would be inaccurate to tell the story of the American West without telling the story of the incredible cruelty that was done to the people that built a lot of the American West. You know, specifically Chinese workers, you know, were horribly mistreated in, you know, the building of railroads, My like all this stuff really did happen. Not like this story specifically, but like stuff like this really did happen. And I just feel like King is like, oh, it's really important if I'm going to tell the story of like the changing landscape of the American West and making that representative of the changing landscape of America as a whole. I have to have this part of it. I can't ignore this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this story sort of feels like the role of the Glanton Gang's massacres in Blood Meridian, where it's like maybe King learned about some, mine disaster that killed dozens of exploited immigrant workers in the West, and was like, okay, yeah, that there's some real world horror to anchor this horror novel in.
Yeah, definitely. So there's stories of what happened, of course, that those miners dug up something down there, and that's why the shaft collapses. Tom mentioned something called the Tommy knockers, and if you're a constant reader, you go, "Wait, I know that word. Hold on, what?"
So what's funny is until this moment, I just kind of assumed that Tommy knockers was like a generic word for gremlins in some dialect, but I just learned while doing the notes for this reading that Tommy knockers literally refers to ghosts of people killed in mine cave-ins.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know that that's what Tommy knockers actually meant, but that's like the actual definition is ghosts from mine disasters.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So if you were to read a 558 page novel by Stephen King called The Tommy Knockers, would you expect there to be a mine shaft in it?
I would expect there to be at least a reference to a mine shaft.
Wrong.
Oh, wrong. Okay.
The Tommy Knockers is such a wild book.
I'll get around
it's not
to it.
good. It's not a good book, but it's wild.
I'm sure it's fun.
All right. So the conclusion of this happy story, Matt, is that a couple of Chinese men show up at the local saloon a few days later and start murdering people. It's claimed that they are escaped from the miners. They're two miners trapped down there that found an alternate way out and escaped. But by the way, Audrey just thinks that's the most ridiculous thing she's ever heard. She's like super, super, super resistant to that idea, which makes me think that that's exactly what happened.
Totally.
She's evil. What do you think? What do you think?
Oh, totally. Yeah, they're totally. They were possessed by whatever's in the mine. They made their way out, and they were inhabited by demonic power, and they killed a bunch of people. Totally what happened.
Okay, great. So Tom leaves to go to the bathroom and to get more drink, while Cynthia squashes a pair of spiders. Nobody reacts to this.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah, they should be more worried about the spiders, but. I mean, I think the truth is, if they really thought through the implications of the guy being able to communicate with animals, then they would actually know that hiding in the theater wouldn't work anyway, because there's creepy crawlies everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's actually hopeless. So even just seeing the spiders, it's like, well, of course there are spiders. There's spiders. Of course there's going to be spiders in an old theater. But
yeah, but two together?
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, the thing is, they're just not really thinking clearly about these risks at this point. They're not taking it seriously.
Mm-hmm. So Tom heads into the bathroom on the verge of drunk. He's thinking about Intragian. He's thinking about how different he is now. And his brain keeps tying this back to Sally, Audrey's horse, and then eventually to Audrey herself. He can't figure out why, though. Eventually he takes a swig of his secret stash. And as he pours through his memories, it finally clicks. And this, as soon as it clicks for him, this is the moment that our mountain lion friend bursts through the window, makes its appearance, and attacks Tom, killing him, basically.
Yep. Mauling him very graphically and brutally, and it's just great. It's great stuff.
Did you think in this moment that there was a possibility that Tom would die before revealing this information, and you're about to be really fucking frustrated because...
Yes. Yes, I did.
That it would have. I appreciate that King gives us at least that. He's not going to have this moment of realization and then strip it away from us.
Yeah, I think I would have been annoyed if that had happened, but I would have accepted it.
The rest of the group hears Tom scream, and some of them rush in right away. Cynthia looks over as everyone like looks to Johnny, who reacts completely cowardly, who just looks away, doesn't do anything, blames his poor eyesight. The other men rush to Tom while Mary chastises Johnny, which gets him moving, but Cynthia still heads in first, rushing into the bathroom to see the situation. Johnny kind of sucks, right? Just kind of really sucks.
Yeah, this is pretty disappointing from old Johnny. He eventually does the right thing, but only after being shamed.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting.
Mm-hmm. So we see in the bathroom, Steve is battling with the cougar as Ralph tries to shoot it, but is afraid of hitting Steve in the process, so is kind of frozen himself. He's missed the first couple of shots. We also see that part of Tom's like beautiful horse wall mural was destroyed with one of the shots, which just made me sad a little bit.
Me too. Hey, pop quiz. How heavy would you guess is the heaviest cougar that was ever found?
I mean, probably pretty heavy, right?
Well, I looked it up. So I'm quizzing you because I mean, I always thought of cougars as being on the smaller side for big cats.
Yeah, I would guess like 300 pounds, maybe.
Yeah, it's a little bit shy of that. It's more like I just had it in front of my eyes and now it's gone. Actually, it's 232 pounds, 232 pounds, which is bigger than I thought. Actually, I kind of thought of them as being smaller. But 232 pound big cat on top of you. Obviously, that's on the large side. But I was honestly, I did think during the scene, like, could a cougar really kill a man like this? I mean, I know a cougar can kill a man theoretically, but it's like, probably.
Probably, yeah, especially when they're being driven by an evil force to act not in its own self-interest, right? Like, I think that your chance with a cougar would be that it doesn't want to die either, and it really just wants to get away from you. But
yes, in fact, I think the only reason why cougars don't kill more people is that they don't try to.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
Finally, Johnny shows up, puts the shotgun right to the cat's head, and pulls the trigger, killing it. I love this statement. I don't believe it, Marinville said. He sounded completely natural to Cynthia for the first time since she'd met him, like a man living in a life instead of playing a role. I don't believe I did it. That woman shamed me into it. Stephen, are you all right? I love how shitty this guy is. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, it took this level of thing to kind of snap him out of his like role of being the great writer and to interrupt that little narrative loop that he's constantly bullshitting himself with.
That woman shamed me into it. Not Mary, not she. That woman shamed me into it.
And kind of like how he says Steven, it makes him seem like older somehow. I don't know.
Yeah. But the cougar's dead. They did it. Unfortunately, Tom is as we said, dying. He does, before he goes, relay the information he's learned. Audrey's dress seems far too short and revealing to be a dress one would wear to a business meeting, and that's because it wasn't a skirt. It was a dress. And she's just gotten a lot taller than she used to be. Just like Collie.
Yeah. Ugh. Dang. Great.
What a moment.
Great moment.
I mean, I think the most fun thing about the moment is it, like we said, it recontextualizes everything that came before, but also like it doesn't directly answer questions either, because we're forced to be like, okay, so there's more than one of them. Okay. How are they the same? Are they different? Like, as you said, like, is there a potential of inter-tac conflict?
Yeah. Are they in communication with each other? And if so, how long have they been in communication? I mean, seemingly not. You would think, because Tack Ellie Tack didn't seem to be aware of this until the spiders told her, right?
Yeah, so needed to send the spiders out, needed to send the cougar out. No mention of, we don't worry, we got someone on the inside there. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, they could even screw each other up, right? That would be such a classic thing to happen, would be like, she's captured David and she's getting away, and then she gets pancaked by Ellie, like that would be, I hope that happens.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
There's an interesting point to be made here, though, Matt. Because Tom, in his death throes, basically blames himself for taking so long to make this connection. And he says there was drinking that made him do this. So if you were to, like, play the God's plan game in all of this, you could make the argument that, like, why we asked this question ourselves, right? Why was Tom spared? Why, Kali and Trajan is driving around this whole town, killing everyone he sees, literally everyone. We have two survivors of Desperation. One of them turns out is also some sort of demon possessed monster.
Uh-huh.
The only other survivor in Desperation, the only other native of this town, is Tom Billingsley. Why? And we made reference to something in his past maybe still could be true, but if you go the 12th dimensional chess version of this, God put Tom Billingsley in that cell with the rest of the group because he was one of the few people in this town with the capacity to recognize that something was wrong with Audrey. He's the prime person. If we're going to come across this person that's pretending to be someone they're not, you have him on your side, team David, to recognize that. But due to his sin, his fault, his vice, his lack of innocency, whatever you want to call it, he fails to do this. He's unable to do this. The book doesn't come right out and say this idea, but I'm curious what your thoughts on it are.
I think you're really onto something. I wasn't really thinking along these lines, but I really like this idea. I think personally, I sometimes fall into this rut of imagining that everything in the story, in any story, is unfolding according to the will of Gan or God or whatever, and it has to happen that way. But I think we basically know that isn't quite true based on what we know of the cosmology of this universe. It's possible for Gan to choose someone to be a specific, to serve a role, to be a tool, and it's possible for them to fail at their task due to personal weakness or their own choices from their own free will, or conversely, it's also possible for them to sort of like succeed in weird, unsanctioned ways, kind of like Ralph Roberts does in Insomnia. So like, I think the element of choice is important in the King cosmos.
Yeah.
And by giving these characters choice, you give them the opportunity to fail. And it's not all predestined. Now, of course, he does really, succeed. Actually, it just takes him longer than you would wish, right?
Sure. So, but I mean, but the way this chapter ends is Audrey Weiler is gone and David Carver is missing as well.
That's true. So I guess he didn't really succeed because it doesn't matter, right?
Well, it might not. We don't know. But yeah. I mean, it's an interesting point. Like, we've talked about the constant wrestle between the concepts of God's plan, of Gan's plan, of both free will and determination. How can these things exist simultaneously? And it certainly does seem that, at least in the world of this book, like, God does not make anyone do anything.
Yeah.
Like, God does not make David, oil himself up with soap and slip through the bars. He does not make the kid come out of a coma with, like, it is almost this idea of, I'm going to put you in the place that I want you to be, or I need you to be, and I'm going to put the people around you need to have. But ultimately, the final choice and the final decision of everything is yours. And I think that does very much fit within the Dark Tower mythos of, like to say Roland didn't have free will is, I think, ridiculous. Like, we watched him make choices throughout the story, and like, that, does that mean Ka as a concept doesn't exist? Certainly not. It certainly does. But like, also he chooses again and again and again. So like, I think it's weird that, like, these terms have given people like me such grief throughout my life of, like, how can these two things be true at the same time? And like, the answer is kind of, I don't know, man. I think they just kind of are.
Yeah. So there was a really great thread in the subreddit this week that you and I were talking about, where everyone was talking about King's approach to Christianity in his novels, and it was a really remarkable thread because everyone was so polite and understanding and generous in their discussions, even though they're talking about what is usually a conversation that goes into the ditch whenever it happens on the internet, which is like disagreeing about religion.
Mm-hmm.
But and yet everyone was very was very generous and kind to each other. So I really
Oh,
appreciate that. And
yeah, it was wonderful. It was wonderful to read and see. It made me very happy.
but the specific note I wanted to pull out of that was I believe someone, and I'm sorry that I don't have it in front of me, so I can't cite the person, but they made an interesting point in reference to like, why is there evil in the world? Is like, well, and I'm really going to kind of boil it down to what I see as the crux is like, well, there's evil in the world because people have free will, because people have to be free to choose the wrong choice. If they weren't free to choose the wrong choice, then it wouldn't really be free will, and then you're not really a human, right?
Yeah.
And I while I may not like quite see the world that way, I think I clearly don't really, frankly. I get that, and I think that maybe King kind of thinks that way about the role of free will here, right? Because like you were just saying, the idea of the characters having the ability to make the wrong choice is crucial to Roland's journey. Obviously, I mean really every character.
Yeah, and once again, a very important distinction between that and between what we see as represented by the minions of Tak, who clearly have no choice in what they're doing.
Yeah,
I think that matters.
I agree.
Yeah. So I mean, we'll continue to circle back around to this. I think this is one of the large things the book is doing, and we cannot really comment or discuss the overall conceit of that until we get there. But I'm glad we're continuing to have these conversations. And yeah, once again, thank you to everyone who participated in that great conversation on the subreddit. That was really great to see.
Yep.
But that is going to do it for us this week. That ends the chapter. Audrey is missing. David is missing. Are they missing together? Has he been kidnapped? We don't even know that, but maybe.
Yeah, maybe. So just one minor note was like the one false note that kept falling from Audrey is that she kept swearing constantly, and especially in front of David. And that was one note where it's like, why is she doing that?
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's because she's a demon. She doesn't know not to swear in front of children.
Yeah, only demons swear in front of children. You heard it here first.
It's true. Well, I mean, and like not just swearing, but she would say stuff like, he screamed like a mountain lion getting screaming, stuff like that, where it's like, I mean, it's not that nobody ever talks like that, but it's like that is kind of over the top, and it's like, yeah, well, that's the way Trajan sort of talks, right?
Yeah,
not that I was
like
thinking that at
that's
the time.
kind of the link to Trajan there.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find out if there's any more there. We still don't really know what's going on here in Desperation. True. We got a little bit more, but
yep.
All right, let's move on. Once again, just to remind folks as we move into the discussion question, we will be off next week, but the first week in 2024, we will come back. We'll finish off part 3 with chapters 4 and 5, and then from there head into the last part of the novel, I believe. So we're getting close, Matt.
All right.
You don't have a book, so you can't really see like just book feel wise how far, but we're definitely well past halfway at this point.
Awesome. I'm excited.
All right, let's talk discussion questions. Last week, what did we ask the folks at home?
So we had talked about the idea of the crusty old theater being sort of Tom Billingsley's church. And so the question was, what are some other unorthodox churches that people could think of and tell us about?
Yeah.
And what does that say about the characters? Baby King You Dig Your Sam says, Neil Gaiman's American Gods presents roadside attractions as places of spiritual power. Rock City and Lookout Mountain, the House on the Rock, and the geographic center of the U.S. in Kansas. I visited the first two, says Sam, are all mentioned in this book. I've also been to Darwin, Montana. Is that MN? Which has the world's largest ball of twine housed in a pagoda. You can leave gifts and letters to the ball of twine. In any case, the idea that these oddities that are often scoffed at as kitschy could be mystical and powerful. Maybe not.
Just so we don't get 100 emails. It's Minnesota.
Is it Minnesota? It could be. It could also be Maine. Why are there so many states that are MN?
Well, there's not. You see, because Maine, I'm pretty sure is ME.
But why are there so many that could be MN?
And I'm pretty sure Montana is MO. What
about I think that's it, actually. still, it's weird. It's not my fault. I'm not from here. Okay. Yes. Sam goes on to say, they may not be kitschy to all that enter, but to some they feel the power humming all around, feel a sense of connection to something greater than themselves, and contemplate the bigger questions of the universe. And maybe that wish that they leave in a letter in that tiny mailbox outside of a pagoda will be granted. Yeah.
That's a great answer. I have read most of Neil Gaiman's novels and short stories. And I still think American Gods is like one of the best things he's ever written. I am in love with that book and the ideas and the concepts it introduces, and it's really, really wonderful. Just as an exploration of America from the perspective of someone who's as you said, not from here. But I think he nails a lot of the uniqueness of America and how we believe and express our faith and power. It's all great. If y'all haven't read American Gods, go read that book. We did a book club episode on it a million years ago, but really good story.
Yeah, it's one of the few books that actually makes you look at your own country differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next, we have Kashakus, who says, the unorthodox church in Firefly is Mal Reynolds' ship Serenity, so named after the Battle of Serenity Valley, where his side lost in their war for independence against the Alliance. In it, he brings together a wide array of personalities that range from the upper-class whore, or companion, depending on who you ask, to the uncouth redneck, to the preacher with a dark past, to the innocent girl on the run from the Alliance. He calls them his crew, but he loves them all like his family, all held within the temple that is his reminder of what he once fought for. So watch Firefly. It's really good. It is really good. I liked Firefly.
Yeah, it was enjoyable. I haven't seen it in a million years, but it is fun, fast-paced episodic TV, and always down for some space opera. Pear Jane says, if you haven't seen the Netflix movie Dumplin', it's about a fat teenager whose mother is a literal beauty queen and has run the town's beauty pageant for years. Dumplin' exercises teenage rebellion by joining the candidates and coaxes some equally unconventional friends to join her. If that's not enough for you, then wait for it. Her personal lord and savior is none other than the divine Miss Dolly Parton, whose music she shared with her favorite aunt. Dumplin's church turns out to be a drag bar at the end of town that hosts Dolly Parton night every Sunday. The bar's performers are supportive, kind, and unabashedly glorify their unconventional lives. They help Dumplin and her friends celebrate their strengths and appreciate the pageant as an opportunity to show the world how wonderful they are. At its best, church is about celebrating an idea that unifies and defines a community. And what better church than drag queens paying homage to the sparkling goddess that is Dolly Parton? That's a great answer.
Yeah, I love that. I have not seen Dumplin', but I remember distinctly my wife watching it one day when I was busy doing something else, and she really enjoyed it. I've always meant to go back and watch that movie, but that's a great answer. I love that.
Yeah, I also like how you specifically said that it's about like the themes of the story. Like that's what a church is, right? And
yeah,
I agree. That is what a church is.
Yeah. TN Bug Doc says, for this one, it has to be Bill Murray's mansion in Zombieland. The pilgrims are led there by Tallahassee, seeking a place of refuge for the night. When Bill himself appears, the look of religious ecstasy on Tallahassee's face when he sees his idol is priceless. That oasis serves as a brief sanctuary for the crew, when all has gone amiss in the world. Sadly, they kill their own idol shortly after arrival. What does that say about the characters? Not sure, but it seems an entirely human behavior to destroy that which we idolize. This is a great answer.
Yeah, I like how you succeeded in wringing some kind of meaning out of the fact that they accidentally kill Bill Murray.
Oh my god, that's a great movie. I loved Zombieland.
Yeah, I've only ever seen that like once, but yeah, it is fun.
I actually liked Zombieland 2 as well. That movie came out in 2019.
Really?
And yeah, it was good.
I didn't even know there was a sequel.
There was a sequel.
Does it have? It has what's his face and what's his face.
It has them all. They all came back for Zombieland 2 Double Tap.
Wow, amazing! I'm so happy.
And it has Zoe Dutch, who is also an actress I really, really like. And she's in it as well. It's very funny. I've only seen it once, so if it's actually bad, don't blame me.
Okay.
But I like both Zombieland movies.
I won't blame you, but I will check it out.
Okay.
All right. Aqua Lungfish says, I'm going to nominate Baby, the 67 Chevy Impala driven by the Winchester brothers in the show Supernatural, as their church. The central conceit of the show, if you somehow manage to avoid the internet for the past 15 years or so, that's me, is these two brothers who were raised to hunt monsters across the U.S., traveling about doing their job. They inherited the car from their father, and they spent most of their childhood, as well as much of the show, going everywhere in the car, pretty much living in it at times. Dean especially formed such a deep attachment to the car that he rebuilt it several times during the course of the show, even recreating imperfections instead of using the opportunity to fix them. The car is a central point in the series, really, giving something to anchor the characters and the story around, and the brothers often go back to the car to center themselves, either through fixing it, driving aimlessly around the country listening to music, or just sitting in or on the car relaxing. This isn't just subtext either. The show outright states the importance of the car several times, most notably in the last episode of the 5th season. It was the end of the original plan the creator had for the show, so it's a solid series finale in its own right, and a large portion of the episode is centered on how important the car is to them. It even plays a role in saving the world at the end of the episode. An amusing side note, there's an episode in a much later season that's from the point of view of the car. The camera never moves outside the car, so you see only what you could see from inside the car, often from the point of view of the dashboard pointing into the interior. It's a fun experiment that leads to some entertaining and amusing scenes, especially when you get information that the characters don't have because they left the car while something happened inside it.
That's really fun. I like that.
That's a fun idea, and it immediately kicks on the part of my brain that's always looking for an idea of a way to film a movie really cheaply.
Yeah. I have never seen a single solitary minute of Supernatural, despite the fact that it ran for 15 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's I have not either. I have not seen it. I have not seen. I don't even know what actors are in it. I don't even know. I only know what the premise is because of the discussion question just now.
Okay, I know who the actors in it are. I know enough about it to know that, and I know vaguely what it's about, but I've never watched a bit of it.
Well,
and it just seems too late to start now. It's 15 seasons long.
It is.
It's the One Piece of CW television.
That's what I was thinking, man.
Last but certainly not least, we have Jerk Stab Worthy, who says the town of Megaton is essentially a cathedral and center of the Church of the Children of Adam in the 2008 action RPG video game Fallout 3. Located in the U.S. capital wasteland, decades after a global nuclear war, it is centered in a crater caused by an undetonated nuclear bomb. Over the years following the war, a surprisingly lore-rich religion developed around the idea of splitting of the atom as the genesis point of the universe and countless others. The town itself has been settled by non-believers who live in an uneasy peace with both the church and the bomb. Let's just hope that some wasteland wanderer doesn't show up with the bomb's missing fusion pulse charge. Be the real shame if that were to happen. Yeah, I did that. I blew the bomb up.
Why did you do that?
Why not?
Oh, fair.
It was there. I mean, I quick saved first. It's fine.
Got to nuke something, as Nelson says.
Did you ever play Fallout 3?
I never played any of the Fallouts, although I do really enjoy watching people make extremely elaborate lore videos about Fallout on YouTube.
Yeah, Fallout 3 is the only one I've ever played. Like I've watched Let's Plays of like the first two back when Let's Plays were a thing.
Yeah.
And then, I hear good things about New Vegas and bad things about 76.
Yeah.
But I've never been a huge Fallout person.
Obviously I haven't either, but it sounds like a really compelling setting, and I don't play a lot of games, is the truth. So
yeah, just God of War.
Yeah, I mean, I play one game a lot is kind of the way I approach things.
All right, those are some really good answers. Those are some really good ones. The question I have for you, Matt, to wrap up the show is: we called this theater the Church of Tom Billingsley, but he died here. Was it a good church? This is where he got drunk.
This
like
is like the Westminster Abbey where he's going to be buried in the floor now. I to take your question more seriously, probably no.
yeah.
I mean, if we riff on what Johnny was saying about like the sound of the wind that you could that was pervasive while you were like sitting there drinking with your buddies, being sort of the sound of the yawning emptiness of the void of nothingness that is the world, and it's like, yeah, this is sort of a church to that emptiness. It's sort of a place of the worship of that emptiness, of that self-abnegation, which is a bad thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it is just interesting. You have this kind of contradiction in that of this is a place that they like cared deeply about and took very good care of, and yet ultimately is an altar to that very idea that you were just talking about. So
yeah,
I like it.
Yeah.
All right, our discussion question for 2 weeks from now is Matt. What is it? What are we gonna ask?
Our discussion question is: who's your favorite "this good guy is actually the bad guy" reveal?
Yes, in honor of Audrey Weiler's just incredible heel turn at the end of this week's reading. Please let us know what other similar reveals do you appreciate.
Yeah, I imagine there will be a lot of spoilers here, so use your discretion or be vague or whatever makes sense.
Sometimes that can't be helped,
Sometimes it can't be helped. I'm not saying. I don't know what I'm saying. I trust y'all to answer the question in a responsible way.
There you go. All right, but that is it for us here this week. As we said, we are off next week. We'll probably try to come up with some bonus thing to release next Thursday, but no new episode of Desperation next week. We'll be back in 2024 with chapters 4 and 5 of part 3 and answers to that wonderful discussion question that's going to spoil us on just everything.
That's right. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, over on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and of course, over at the subreddit at r/doofmedia if you want to answer that discussion question, or just check out some of the other really interesting threads that are always popping off.
Yeah, go check out that thread on Stephen King's Christianity. I think that's worth spending some time in for sure.
Yeah.
But if you're not already a subscriber to Kingslingers, now is the time. It's never, I mean, every time is the time, but specifically this time right now, it's a 3:53 on a Tuesday. And you got to subscribe.
The best time to subscribe was 3 years ago. The second best time to subscribe is right now.
Someone's going to be listening to this at 3:55 on a Tuesday.
Uh-huh.
They're going to be freaking out.
They are. That's right, Jonathan.
What are the actual what are the actual statistical odds of that happening exactly that way? Probably not great.
I do kind of wonder if this is like one of those things where the odds of two people in a room having the same birthday are always surprisingly high because of the way numbers work, even though it's super unintuitive. So
perhaps.
Maybe.
Yeah, we'll find out if someone sends us an email. They're freaking out.
Yeah, let us know. And if you like the Kingslingers and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia, or you could head on over to doofmedia.myshopify.com and buy some cool stuff. We're always adding new stuff over there, so even if you've already kind of checked it out, maybe go check it out again.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of cool shit there. I'm so excited about it, and we're really happy with the response so far. A lot of y'all have been ordering some mugs and shirts and sweaters, and it's so great. Thank you everyone who's checked it out.
Yep.
And make sure you support us on Patreon because that Castle Rock show is coming.
That's right.
Castle Talk. Castle Rockin'.
Castle Talk. That's not bad. It's not the worst.
I'm pretty sure a listener came up with that one. So we have to make sure we give them credit if that's what we go with.
I see.
But if you cannot afford to support us right now, that is absolutely okay. There are tons of absolutely free ways to help us out. You can continue to share the podcast. We know you guys are doing it. We know you guys are still doing it every day because we get emails from new people that find us because of you. So thank you. And As always, a great way that's easy and free to help support us is to leave us rating and reviews. This week's review comes from Jennifer H. over on Audible, who leaves us 15 stars and says, best podcast for constant readers. Only 4 episodes in, and I'm enjoying this almost as much as the books. Well, that is... There's no way that's true.
Well, we appreciate the lie.
I love you, Jennifer, but no. The books are way better than this. They're way better.
But thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks to every single one of you who has and continue to leave those reviews. We do see the number and the new reviews happen every week, so we appreciate that so much. All right, that's it. We're done. We did it. Let's go do Christmas now. We'll see you guys in a couple weeks. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.